Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at InterArmor Solutions, and you're listening to BriefingsDirect. The clear and present danger facing businesses and governments from cybersecurity threats has only grown more clear and ever present as we enter 2021. As the threats from runaway ransomware attacks and state-sponsored backdoor access to networks deepen, too many businesses have a false sense of quick recovery using their traditional business continuity and backup measures. That's because the criminals are increasingly compromising vulnerable backup systems and data first, before they attack. As a result, visions of flipping a switch to get back to a ready state may be a dangerous illusion that keeps business leaders under a false sense of business as usual. Stay with us now as we explore new ways of protecting the backups first and foremost so that cyber recovery becomes an indispensable tool in any IT and business security arsenal. We'll now learn how Unisys and Dell are elevating what was data redundancy to protect against natural disasters into something much more resilient and powerful. To learn more about the latest in rapid cyber recovery strategies and technologies, please join me now in welcoming our guests. We're here with Andrew Peters, Director of Global Business Development for Security at Unisys. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, thank you, Dana.
We're also here with David Finley, Director of Information Assurance and Security in the Data Protection Division at Dell Technologies. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Dana. Glad to be here.
David, what's happened during the last few years, and now I guess especially with the FireEye and SolarWinds attacks, that makes cyber recovery, as opposed to cyber, or I should say disaster recovery, so critical?
I get asked that question a few times just in the last few weeks, as you might imagine. Really, there's a couple of things to note with these attacks, SolarWinds and FireEye. One, especially with FireEye, it was demonstrated to, I think, the entire world, something that we didn't really have our eye on, so to speak. And that is the fact that folks that have really good security, where they sit back and the CISO and the security team say, we've got really good security. We spend a lot of money. We've done a lot of things. We feel pretty good about what we've done. That's all great, but what was demonstrated with FireEye, Dana, is that even the best can be compromised. If you have a nation-state-led attack, or you're targeted by, say, a cyber crime family, then all bets really could be off, and they can get in, and they demonstrated that with this attack. The other thing is they also were able to steal tools. So nothing worse could happen than just having, the bad guys having new tool sets that they could actually use. So we believe that with the increased threat from the bad actors because of these things, we really, really need the notion of the cyber vault, or the third copy, if you will. If you go back and you think about the 3-2-1 rule, 3 copies to different locations, one off-site or offline, is really where we need to be.
So, Andrew, it sounds like we have to assume that we are going to be or are already attacked. And so just having a good defense isn't really enough. What's the next level that we need to attain?
Well, that's the concept. A lot of times organizations are thinking that their security and their defenses are strong enough to be able to mitigate virtually anything that happens to the organization. But I think what's been proven now is just like if it isn't more evident that the bad guys are clever, they're finding ways in. And with SolarWinds, they found another backdoor into an organization and an operation coming in as a trusted entity, something you would think that because you have had signed SAML tokens, you're going to have signed certificates that you trust, you're letting them in. And it's just proven that, well, you can't exactly trust them. And when they come inside the organization and they win, what do you do next? What do you do when you actually lose? So the concept here is plan to win, but at the same time, prepare to lose.
And David, we've also seen an uptick in the success of ransomware payouts. How is that also changing the landscape for how we protect ourselves?
I recently was thinking about that, and I saw something written. I forget where it was. It might have been a Wall Street Journal article on security recently. But they said, the CISOs in the organizations out there have a decision to make after these kinds of attacks. The decision really becomes pretty simple to them. Do they pay the ransom, or do they not pay the ransom based upon the aspect of getting the business going within a reasonable time frame and not losing that kind of money? We'd all like to say, don't pay the ransom. The FBI says don't pay the ransom because of the obvious reasons of you pay it, they may come back, they're going to want more, it's such a bad precedent, all those things. But the reality of it is, when this actually happens to a company, they have to sit down and make the hard decision. Do I pay or do I not pay? It's based upon the business and getting the business running again. We want to position ourselves together with Unisys and be able to create a cyber vault that is secured in a way that our customers will never have to pay the ransom. So if you can imagine, if we have a protected set of data that is the most important data to the firm, that's stuff that they have to have tomorrow morning to actually be able to run the business, and it's in a protected vault, secured by Zero Trust through Unisys Stealth software to be able to secure it and get it back out and put it back into play, that's the best answer. Not paying the ransom, not paying the ransom, double negative, but actually having the data available to bring back to play the next day. Because a lot of these attacks, as we know, are not only just stealing data like they did recently with FireEye, but it's also encrypting and deleting and destroying data.
And another threat vector, I suppose, these days is that more people are working remotely. There's more networks involved. There are more endpoints involved. People are having to be their own IT director in their own homes in many cases. How does the COVID-19 work from home trend impact this, Andrew?
The whole thing is there's far more points of entry, whereas you might have had anywhere from 10 to 15% of your workforce remotely accessing the network, and access was fairly controllable. Now you have, if they're knowledge workers, you're going to have up to 100% of them working remotely and accessing the network. There's more points of entry. From a security perspective, there's more rules that need to be addressed to control access into the network, into an operation. And then one of the challenges that an organization has is once you're on the inside, they're big flat networks. And oftentimes the bad guys can map the network, learn the systems that are there, learn the operations extraordinarily well, and manipulate them, taking advantage of perhaps zero-day vulnerabilities in systems and such, and operate within that environment without even being discovered. As once again, going back to the SolarWinds, I think they were operating for potentially about 8 months before they were eventually discovered.
And so are we at a point going on 30 years of using wide area networks where even after all that time, we're still in some sense of a false sense of security? David, do we not understand the threats around us?
Well, I think not only with COVID-19 and the work from home efforts and all those things that going into that, which we recognize as being vulnerable, there also is the notion that within our organizations and within the public sector, a lot of times we believe that what we've done is good enough. And good enough can be really our enemy, because I can't tell you the number of times I've spoken with folks during incident response or after incident response from a cyber attack where they said, we thought we were secured. We didn't know that this could happen to us, but it did happen to us. So that false sense of security is very real out there. Again, evidenced by these high-level attacks on firms we never thought would happen to them. And it's not just FireEye, and it's not just SolarWinds. We've had attacks on COVID-19 clinical trial providers. We've had attacks on our own government entities. And some of these attacks have been successful. And as you know, I think, Dana, a lot of these attacks, they don't even get publicized. So here's the most dangerous thing, I think, in this false sense of security we're talking about. And I ask customers this a lot. What percentage of the attacks do you actually believe you have visibility to just within your own region? And the honest answer is usually probably less than 20%. I do this every day for a living, as does Andrew, and we probably have visibility to maybe 50%, because a lot of times these attacks happen and they get swept under the rug. They get cleaned up for brand problems with a firm that got attacked or many other reasons, right? So we don't know what's happening. That also leads us to a false sense of security. So again, I believe that we do everything we can up front to secure our systems, but in the event that something does get through, we need to make sure that we have a secure offline copy of these backups and our data.
You know what's an interesting dynamic that I've noticed happening in organizations since the pandemic is that, organizations that we've been talking to about cyber recovery and about having that third copy to bring themselves back from the brink of extinction, while they recognize this is important, they say, you know what, we can't afford to do it right now. This is squeezed us so much. Well, we know that they're investing in backup. We know they're investing in disaster recovery, but they go like, we may table this one because it's something that it's a bit too expensive now. However, on the other side, there are organizations that are really picking up at this point in time, saying like, you know what, we see this as way more critical because we know the attacks are picking up. The challenge here is organizations that they're feeling squeezed, that they can't afford to invest in a solution like this. The question here is, can they afford not to invest in this, given all the exposure of the threats to the organizations? And we keep going back to SolarWinds one. That is just a big wake-up call. But if we go back to other attacks that happened to organizations in recent past through use of such as the wasted locker, using that as a backdoor in the process, the procedures that the bad guys are using to get into an organization, to learn how they operate, to find additional backdoors and operate within that environment, and even learn to avoid the security technologies that were put there specifically to detect breaches and such, and operate with impunity within that environment, and then eventually learn the environment well enough to shut them down enough. So that company has two choices. That company can either pay the ransom, go out of business. And bad guys, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the bad guy. If you're a bad guy, what would be your goal? Do you want to expose the company's information, embarrass them? No, you want to make money. And if they're in the process of making money, how do you do it? You've got to squeeze an organization as much as possible. And that's what this ransomware and these backdoors and everything is designed to do, is squeeze an organization enough to where they're forced to pay the ransom.
So we need a better full digital insurance policy, and many organizations have insurance in the form of disaster recovery designed for business continuity, but that might not be enough. So what are we talking about when we make this shift from thinking about business continuity to cyber recovery? David, what are some of the fundamental challenges organizations need to overcome to make that transition?
What I've seen really globally over the last many years, actually, the last 4 or 5 years, is that the number one challenge that we have in that whole notion is that we need to realize that disaster recovery and all the tenets of disaster recovery do not cover us in the event of a cyber disaster. So those things are two very different things. So oftentimes what I will challenge people with is the notion of how do they really differ? And just to paint a picture, we've been doing disaster recovery basically the same way, all of us in the world, for a number of years, probably a number of decades, many decades. And the way it normally works is we have our key systems and their data connected to another site outside of a disaster radius, earthquake, flood, tornado, that kind of a thing, hurricane. And we copy that data through a wide open pipe to the other side on a regular basis. And it's an always open circuit to the other side. And we've been doing it that way for 40 years. So what I often ask customers of ours is, based upon that, how much do you spend every day to do disaster, every year to do disaster recovery? What does it really cost? Do you test? What are the real costs for DR for you? And there's usually a tangible answer. With that in mind, the next question is, really, if you look at the probability of something happening in the future to you, would you think it's more probable that a natural disaster event, earthquake, flood, those things that we protect from DR and the data centers against, or would it be a cyber disaster that's more probable? And the answer is unanimously, it's been 100% so far over the years, it's going to be a cyber disaster. So then, of course, the next question is, how do you deal with cyber recoveries? And is it a function of disaster recovery within your organization? And the answer usually is, well, we don't deal with it very well. So what we've seen is the infrastructure groups and the security groups are just in the last year or so been making cyber recovery part of DR planning. And it's taken a long time to get there. And when you think about that, if the probability of cyber events is much higher than disaster events, and we spend $1 million, we'll say, per year on disaster recovery, how much do we spend on true cyber recovery? And the answer historically, at least when I ask the question, has been we spend very little on true cyber recovery. That's what's got to change. We've got to change how we approach this. We've got to bring the security folks, the risk folks into those decisions on protecting data and look at it through the lens of a cyber event destroying all the data, just as a hurricane may destroy all the data.
Just to add to that just a little bit, in talking to a lot of organizations, what exactly are you going to do if you do have a ransomware meltdown? How are you going to recover? We're going to go to our DR. Okay. What if those files are polluted and you discover that when in your recovery process? Okay, that's going to be a bad situation. We'll go find some tapes and stuff. I'm like, okay, do you have a run book for this? No. Okay, well, how do you know exactly what you're going to do? And then the second corollary to that is like, how long is this going to take? How long can you sustain your operations? How long can you sustain your company? And what kind of loss are you going to sustain while you're figuring out how to do this when you're going through the process of trying to bring your organization back after a meltdown like this? And then what's that tipping point where you're going to say, like other organizations have said, you know what, we're just going to pay the ransom?
It also begs the question, Andrew and Dana, that we often see folks that they kind of miss, and I ask folks this a lot too, is do you believe that your CEO and or your board of directors, the folks that don't do IT as an everyday job, the folks that are running a business, do you believe that they understand disaster recovery and the difference between that and cyber recovery? In other words, if I was to ask people on the board of any organization if they were secure in their disaster recovery plans, most of them would say, yes, that's what we pay our teams to do. If I was to ask them, well, do you believe that being able to recover from cyber disasters is included in that and done well? The answer would be yes. And oftentimes that is simply not the truth. They don't understand, again, the difference between disaster recovery and cyber recovery. So the data can all be gone from a cyber event just as easily as it can be gone from a hurricane or a flood, right? So we have to approach it from that perspective and start thinking through these things. And we have to be able to take that to our boards and have them understand that, you know what, we've spent a lot of money for 4 decades on disaster recovery. We need to start really spending money on cyber recovery. We get a lot of pushback, both from Dell and from Unisys. We get a lot of pushback at times from customers saying, well, yes, of course, making a third copy, storing it somewhere secure, putting it there in a way where we can always get it back, that's a good idea. It's a great idea. Boy, but that costs money. Well, you know what? You've been spending millions on disaster recovery. Make it a part of that effort.
And to what degree are the bad guys who are trying to squeeze companies already targeting this discrepancy? Do they recognize that there's an ability to go in and compromise the backups, the disaster recovery, in such a way that when push comes to shove, there is no insurance policy? How clever have the bad guys, gotten at understanding this vulnerability?
First off, of course, I would say, what would you do if you were the bad guy and you wanted to extort money from an organization? You know, if they have any way of recovering, then it's going to be pretty hard to extort from them. It's going to be hard to squeeze them. Okay, first. Second, these guys are not broke. They're professional organizations. There's good ones, there's bad ones. There's script kiddies, and then there's a lot of the a lot of the focus is in the GRU, the former KGB operation that's in Russia. Cozy Bear and a number of these different organizations, they're well funded. They have very clever people there. They're able to attain technologies, reverse engineer them, understand how the security technologies operate, and understand how to build tools to avoid them. Okay, so that's first off. So they want to get inside an organization and learn how the operation runs and learn specifically what's key and critical to an organization. Now, second thing, if I'm going to take out the primary systems, but I want to make sure that you're not able to restore them. This is not rocket science here. So, of course, are they going to be targeting backups? Are they going to be polluting the files that you're going to be actually putting in your backups so they can, if an organization tries to recover, they can create a situation that's as bad, if not worse than it was previously? What would you do? And you've got to figure that this is exactly what the bad guys are doing in organizations, and they're getting better at it. So, Dave, you have an addition to that?
Yeah, I do, Andrew. Thank you. They are getting better at it. You know, we've been watching this pretty closely for the last over a year now. And if you go out to any of the pundits that are out there, or just subscribe to folks like Bleeping Computer or Security Today, or even CIO Magazine, or all these things, or CISO, you see the same thing when it comes to this. They talk about the fact that it is getting worse. It's getting worse on a regular basis. They are targeting backups. We're finding it actually written in the code, where the first part of what they're going to do when they drop this on the network is they're going to go seek out security tools to disable them, right, Andrew? And then they're going to go out and they're going to seek out shadow copies, delete them. They'll seek out backup catalogs, delete them. And this is the one that a lot of people miss, this next one. And I just read this again yesterday. It was published last, I think, February by the FDIC. And they're publishing this document to the member banks. They said, you guys have been doing disaster recovery basically in a very good fashion for a number of decades now. You copy information from one bank to another or from one banking location to another, and you're able to recover from disasters and spin up, applications and data, in a secondary location. That's all great. But realize that if you have malware attacking you in your primary location, it very often will make its way to your disaster recovery location. And you will be, and as the FBI said this point blank, they said, and you will get infected in both locations. A lot of people don't think about that. I had a conversation with a CISO one time a while back, it's probably a year or two ago. And I said, what if they get to production, the data's gone, and they manage to move laterally and they get to your disaster recovery site and the data's gone? And this particular CISO said, we call that an oh crap moment because there's nothing they can do. That's the thing that we have to protect against. We have to have that third copy. I can't stress it nearly enough.
All right, well, we've talked about this third copy quite a bit. Let's hear more about the Dell Unisys Alliance and the technology and strategies about getting in front of this, and so that cyber recovery becomes your main insurance policy, not your afterthought insurance policy.
Really, we want everyone to understand that the reality is the bad guys can get in, they can destroy data. We've seen it too many times. A lot of times when we work for a particular company and we just have visibility to the area where we exist, we don't see this happening in other places, but it is real. So if that is the fact, right, that it is real, that things could be encrypted or deleted or exfiltrated, and if that is the fact, then why not have that insurance policy, Dana, as you said? Why not have that third copy? So what we believe is that the only way to truly protect this information, because if the bad guys can see it, if they can see it and get to the machines that hold it and get to the data, whether the data is locked on disk or not, made immutable, they call it, or whatever, if they can get there, they can destroy it. It's a real simple proposition. So we've identified, many years ago that the only way to really, truly protect against that is to make a copy of it and get it offline, which is, it's evidenced by what the federal government and Homeland Security are saying today, what the FBI is saying today. Everybody's giving us the same guidance. They're saying, take the backups, the copies of your data, store them somewhere away from the data that you're protecting, and ideally on the other side of an air gap and offline. So when we create this third copy from our Dell solution for cyber recovery, we take the data that we back up every day and we move that key data to another site across an air gap. The idea is the connection between the two locations is dark until we run a job to actually move the data from, say, production to a cyber recovery vault. With that in mind, there's no way in until we bring up that connection. Now, that connection is secured through stealth and through key exchanges and certificate exchanges to where the bad guys can't get across that connection. They can't get in. In other words, if you have a vault that's going to hold all your important data, right, the bad guys can't get in. They can't get through the door. Even though we open a connection, they can't use that connection to ride into our vault. And with that in mind, we can take that third copy and store it in this cyber vault and keep it safe. Now, getting the data there and having the systems outside the vault communicate to the machines inside the vault to make sure that all of that is secure is something that we partnered with Unisys on. I'll let Andrew take that from here to tell you about how that works.
Well, first off, just Dave, you're not talking about putting all the data into the vault, right? What specifically, are people looking for data that's critical to their operation, like what?
Well, a quick example of that. We have a company that does, they have to go unnamed, obviously, but they do paint. They create paint, right? Around the world, paint. And one of their key systems is their color matching databases. And guess what? That's the data they put into the cyber vault, because they've determined that if that data is gone, they can lose like $1 million per day. Now, another example of that would be an investment firm that we work with. The investment firm puts their trade databases inside the vault because they've discerned that if their trade databases are infected or affected or deleted or encrypted and they go down, then they lose multiple millions of dollars per hour. So to your point, Andrew, it's usually key systems, key information, things like that. And I think, as you know, and you can talk about also, what about those critical materials to run your network, right?
Oh, well, other things too is like your Active Directory, your domain servers. If you're a bad guy, what are you going to attack? Because I want to cripple you so much that even if you had that data, you can't use it. I'm going to just stop you in your tracks. Now, I say from a security perspective, there's a few things that are important. And one is the data efficacy. How do I know that what I'm going to take? So I'm going to take that critical data and I'm going to securely move it into a vault. There's going to be there's going to be automation. So I'm not depending on somebody to do this. This is going to happen automatically. So I'm going to move it into the secure vault. And I want that vault to be air-gapped. I want it to be abstracted from the network and the environment so bad guys can't find it. Even if they could find it, they can't see anything and they can't talk to it. Okay, the second thing is I want to make sure that the data that I'm moving in there has high efficacy. Basically, I know that it's not been polluted, because bad guys are going to want to pollute the data, because typically the things you put into the backup, you don't know, is it good? Is it bad? Has it been corrupted? So if it's going to be moved into the vault, we want to know if it's good or if it's bad. That way, if we're going to be going into a recovery, I can select the files that I know are good, and I can separate them from the bad. This is really important because that's one of the critical things, is that when you're going into any form of recovery, you typically aren't going to know unless you have a system that's designed to be able to discern good from bad. And you don't want to be rebuilding your domain server and have the thing find out that it's actually polluted, that it's locked, that it has ransomware embedded in it. Bad guys are clever. The question I always ask is like, what would you do if you were a clever bad guy? Sometimes hard to think unless you put your bad guy hat on. So there's another thing here too, the element of time. How am I going to get this data? I've got all this data, these files, these applications, and they're in my vault. How am I going to move them back into my production environment? Okay, because my production environment might be polluted. I've still got IT security is trying to clean my environment, and I've got to get my services back up and running, but I've got a compromised network. And what's the problem? The problem's time. Ultimately, all this comes down to business continuity and time. How quickly can I continue my critical operations? How quickly am I going to be able to get them up and running, despite the fact that I still have a lot of issues that are happening with regard to ransomware, with regard to hackers inside an operation? And from a security perspective, these are some unique things that we do with cyber recovery. The cyber recovery's got the ability, the automation to move your critical data into a secure vault, to analyze it for data efficacy, to determine if the data has been compromised, and then providing you a run book so you know how you're going to be able to get that data back out and get systems operating, get users back on day zero of an attack, by being able to use things like cryptography, cloaking, to basically hide things from the rest of the network, so I can use a cryptographic microsegmentation to restore the operations of critical services, to be able to get users back on those services. Even if my network is compromised, I can start doing that very, very much immediately. So when you put the whole cyber recovery solution that we put together here has this automation and has the security built into it to be able to get the critical data on a daily basis, move it into a vault, analyze it, and then give you a run book and a capability to quickly move it back out and get those critical services back up and running. So back to you, Dave.
Yeah, Andrew. So that's a good discussion. You know, one of the things that everyone needs to, I hope they understand, is that we can create a secure vault and put information in it and do that securely. But as Andrew was talking about, most folks want the ability to monitor, manage, and update a secure vault from their SOC or from their NOC and be able to do that. When we first started a relationship with Unisys around the stealth software, I was very excited because a couple of years before that, we were working with folks to show them how to use firewalls, right, to protect, information going in and out of our cyber vault, or how to configure virtual private networks or VPNs to make that happen. And when I really sat down, this is a couple years ago, Andrew, when we first got together, looked at stealth software, and to your point, how when we set it up from a zero trust perspective and set up the agents on the machines and the connections in and out of the vault, once that's all done, it becomes invisible. When I first saw that and realized that those tunnels that you guys create to our vault are as secure as they are, I realized quickly that not only did it allow us to have a new way to manage everything from outside, but also to monitor everything from outside. But I think to your point also is it allows us to take that, what we know is clean data inside the vault, and be able to restore it quickly through one of those stealth tunnels back to the outside. So that, just to me, when we first sat down a couple years back, was something that was hugely important, because there is, we all know, there are various ways to secure communications like this. Probably the least secure nowadays is VPN, right, or remote access, if you will. The next probably least secure, quite frankly, is firewall access and port access. And the most secure is going to be using, quite frankly, I believe, zero trust software like we get with Unisys.
Yeah, it's interesting. If the technologies that have been used to date were so effective, a lot of the concept of a wall, and it's not that I just want to do a beat down on the concept of a firewall, because firewalls and ancillary technologies are very effective in protecting organizations, but they're not 100% effective. If they were, we wouldn't even be talking about ransomware at all. The reason that we are is because there are breaches that occur. And the bad guys go after the low-hanging fruit. Who's going to be basically most compromisable? And they're going to hit those organizations first. But as those fall, they're going to get better at their craft, and they're going to start going after more and more organizations. And I happen to know that more than one organization, having worked with their security groups for some time, are excellent security organizations. But you can't always prevent against things that people do. Or now what's happening is that you can't even trust the organizations in the software that you're supposed to trust. There's more avenues into an organization now. There's more means to compromise. The bad guys get better at their craft. They can monetize what they're doing through use of Bitcoin and ransoms, et cetera, et cetera. So at the end of the day, the threats to the organizations are changing. They're evolving. And the defenses that an organization has, you've got to get to the point where you know that you can't depend on them in the long run, that they're probably going to have to plan on the fact that you're potentially going to be compromised. And when the compromise happens, you have to ask, what do we do now?
All right, well, as we're coming to the end of our discussion, are there any examples that you can point to, not of how bad they were attacked, because we know how bad that can be, but how well they were able to recover when they had that third copy that was unattainable to the bad guys, and that was something that was kept up to date through automation, was crafted properly in the first place, and then had that ability for that rapid recovery. So do we have any either use cases or actual customer stories that we can relay to show how it works when it's done properly?
Sure, and we're getting collectively between all of us more and more of those every day, unfortunately, right? So I'll tell you one that just happened not too long ago. It was with a school system in California, and that particular school system had worked with us to procure the cyber recovery solution, create a cyber vault, the third copy, secure all of that. We installed it, as the story goes, we installed and got it all up and running and moving data into the vault and securing it on a Thursday of a particular week. And they had a cyber event happen to the school system. It's one of the biggest school systems in that part of California. They had a cyber event happen over the weekend at that school system, and they had just got the vault up and running and copied all the data into it. The data that was in the vault was secure. They were able to recover it as soon as they forensically could, according to the FBI, because the data was secure. And it saved a bunch of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money. Now, I contrast that to a couple other major attacks on other companies that happened in the last 120 days. One where they had no cyber vault. The customer data was attacked in production, and a lot of DR was attacked. And that particular set of events was done through a whole series of social engineering, but they were taken down, encrypted, and a lot of the data was destroyed. It took them days, if not weeks, to actually begin the recovery process because of all the things that we all need to be aware of that happens during that. If you don't have data that you know is secured somewhere else that is clean, you're going to have to verify it's clean before you can recover it. So you're going to have to do test recoveries to systems and make sure you're not restoring malware, and that's going to take a long period of time. You're not even going to be able to do that until law enforcement can tell you can do that. Another thing to keep visibility on here, Dana, is the fact that when you're in the middle of incident response with these companies, regardless of who you are, that the last thing that you're going to do right in the middle of incident response is connect to the internet. So if your data is stuck somewhere in a public cloud or in a cloud environment, you're not going to be able to go get it while you're in the middle of incident response. Imagine that as what the FBI characterizes as a crime scene. They put up the yellow tape around the crime scene, which is your network, and they're not going to allow anybody to get in or anybody to get out until they're satisfied with all the data that they've gathered to be able to figure out what happened. And a lot of folks don't know that, but it is simply true. So having the data accessible, having it offline, on the other side of the air gap, having it scrubbed every day to make sure that it's absolutely clean, right, is so very important. In the case of the second company, again, it took days, if not weeks, before they could recover information. Now, there's a third example, which I thought was very fascinating. And the IT fellows at the third company told me, they said, this saved our company. This saved our butts, they said. And Andrew's aware of this one too. And in this particular one, they were actually crypto locked in basically in most all their systems. They were using backup software to write a virtual appliance. And they were copying that data from a virtual appliance into our cyber vault. They also had our physical appliance called Data Domain from Dell in production, writing it into the cyber vault. They did not have our analytics software to scrub and make sure it was clean because it was an older implementation. But at the end of the day, what happened was everything in production, imagine that was gone. But when they went in and they basically went to the cyber vault data, they realized that the data was all still good. The bad guys couldn't get there. To Andrew's point earlier, they couldn't see the cyber vault. They didn't know how to get there. There's no way they could get to that information. So in this case, they were able to spin up restores rather quickly to be able to restore that information. Now, we have had one other incident I'd like to point to. It's much like the other three, where in the cyber vault, they had our CyberSense software, which does cyber analytics on the data that we're storing. The idea is we can verify the data is clean at a 99.7% effective level to be able to tell the customer each day the data is restorable and clean. In this case, the FBI got involved. The FBI actually used our information from our CyberSense software to actually be able to help them ascertain the who, what, when, and where actually happened to this firm. And then once they know who, what, when, and where, they knew the data was clean that we were storing, and then we were able to do more rapid restores.
What's important to that, Dave, is knowing what to do. Okay, what applications are you going to recover first? What do you need to do to get your operation running? Where are you going to find those files? Who's going to actually do the work? What systems are you going to recover them on? Having a plan of action versus like, okay, we're going to figure this out right now, but having that pre-prescribed run book that's going to take you through the process and the procedures of the decisions that need to be made, where the data is going to be recovered from, where it's going to determine how it's recovered, who's going to get access to it, all these things. There's a whole plan that goes into this. This is different than DR. This is different than backup. It's way different. It's its own animal. And one thing is that we've got the systems in place, and this is another place where Dell expertise comes in, is being able to do the consulting work with an organization to define the plan or the run book so they can recover. There's one other point I was going to make as well, and it's a consideration about paying ransomware payments. It's not always a real clean option to actually make the payment, because the U.S. Treasury Office of Foreign Affairs Control may fine an organization, or actually it could even get worse if they actually paid a ransom, because their consideration is if this ransom is going to be potentially paid, and the recipients of that payoff are considered a threat to the United States, you may be breaking another law if you're actually paying the ransom. So it's not a clear cut whether it's just okay to freely pay off a ransom itself. So that needs to be taken into consideration. If an organization is breached, is compromised, is ransomed, and pays the ransomware off, they may actually be breaking federal law.
All right, well, we're just about out of time, but I wanted to address how you get started on something like this. It seems to me that the Dell Cyber Recovery Vault and the Unisys Stealth technologies enable you to do a sort of a crawl, walk, run approach to cyber recovery, that you can identify those corporate jewels, that intellectual property, the things that you could be held against you for ransom, and then broaden from there. Is that the case, David? Is there a way for you to create a beachhead and then expand? How do people typically go to market and develop their solutions with these technologies?
To give the audience an idea of what we believe is the best practice there, what we like to see is the notion of let's decide to protect what we call critical rebuild materials first. Let's build the beachhead around the critical materials first. And what we've seen a lot of success in is getting those materials like dumps of Active Directory, whether they be crash consistent or active dumps of Active Directory in our vault, DNS zone tables in our vault, settings for network in our vault, security logs, event logs in our vault. The stuff that tomorrow and everything else was pretty much what I call toasted in your production environment, that you could get out of the vault and make everything work again. If any of you have studied the Maersk attack in 2017, they didn't have any of that, and that was a very bad day. They finally found those copies in Africa, but if they hadn't found them, it would have been a very bad month or year. So with that kind of a thing in mind, right, it's happened to many folks besides just them. They just happen to be most publicized. So with that in mind, let's get those materials into the vault, to your point, Dana, as a beachhead, if you will. Let's build together the notion of this third location. Let's secure it with stealth, and let's secure it with an air gap that's basically enveloped in stealth, if you like, and all the connections in and out of the vault protected by stealth from zero trust. And then let's take those critical materials and build that beachhead there. Ideally, what I've seen great success in is doing that, and then gathering maybe total of 3 to 5 of the most critical business applications that a firm may have, and concentrating on them first, right? Here's what we don't want to do. I've seen no success with this. For us all to sit down and say, okay, we're going to go through 150 different applications and all their dependencies and everything, and what we would do normally for a business impact analysis, and we're going to decide which ones of those and pieces of those go into the cyber vault. It can be done, and it has been done, and we have consulting that can help do that between Dell and Unisys, but let's don't start that way. We can do all of that over time. Let's start like we did recently with a big company here in the U.S., where we started with critical materials. We chose 5 major applications first, and the first 6 months, that's what we did. We protected that environment and those 5 major applications. And you know what? As time goes on, we will move other key applications into the cyber vault. But we decided not to boil the ocean, not to try to look at 2,000 different applications and all their data, right, and put it in the vault. Things like, I talked to a firm recently that does pharmaceuticals. Intellectual property is huge for them, right? Putting their intellectual property into the cyber vault is really key. It doesn't mean all their systems. It means they want intellectual property in the vault and those critical materials. So I wouldn't call it start small, Dana, but I would call it, like you said, build the beachhead, but build it. Build it, and then you can move any number of things into it over time.
What I'd like to actually even offer up is we have a demonstration that we can show you what this whole thing looks like, and consider it a transfer of information to where we can show you what it looks like to make things disappear on your network through cloaking, moving data from a production environment into a vault, basically, and retention locking that, analyzing the data, finding out if something's bad on it, being able to select last known good copy of data and start to rebuild systems in your production environment. We have something that's set up, we walk through, and we can show each step of this on down to, well, what if somehow you had an environment you're recovering and malware managed to slip inside of that? Well, we can detect that and we can shut it down in about 10 to 15 seconds. We'd like to be able to offer up for organizations that are interested in that to actually see this in working in real time in a real live demo.
I agree. That's a powerful demo for all the folks that are listening. You can see this thing work from beginning to end, to see how the buttons are pushed and how the data essentially moves, how the scrubbing of the data to make sure it's clean is done, to Andrew's point, How it's fascinating for me. The first time I saw this, it was great. How, if you think about this, with stealth involved, and you have, say, a group of machines talking to a cyber vault before stealth, and we go in and we map the IPs and the ports. If we install stealth and we go in and map the IPs and the ports, they're invisible after we install. Which is, if you think about it from a bad guy perspective, here's a rule of the road. If they can't see it, they can't get there. That's the message. And that's what we can do together. And that's what the demo shows, all of that.
Well, the other great thing is if I'm going to rebuild my systems, let's say I've got 782 files and 55 of them are bad, I'm going to see this list. It's like good, bad, good, bad. If it's bad, then I go, okay, well, I backed up yesterday and I had the analysis done and I knew yesterday it was good. Now today it's bad. Deselect the bad, select the good. All from a single pane of glass. Okay, now I'm going to do my rebuild. Single pane of glass. This is all happening in one place where I get visibility. It's going to tell me what the status is of the data, of the files, of the application, of the gold copy, or anything that I've got on that system. I know if it's good or bad. I select the good or the last known good copy, which should never be more than 24 hours old, and restore with that.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored Briefings Direct discussion on new ways of protecting the backups first and foremost so that cyber recovery becomes an indispensable tool in any IT or business security arsenal. And we've learned how a joint solution between Unisys and Dell elevates what was once data redundancy in backups into a much more resilient and powerful cyber recovery regime. So please join me in thanking our guests. We've been here with Andrew Peters, Director of Global Business Development for Security at Unisys. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
We've also been here with David Finley, Director of Information Assurance and Security in the Data Protection Division at Dell Technologies. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Andrew.
Hey, thank you too, Dave.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining this Briefings Direct Cybersecurity Innovation discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Interarbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of Unisys and Dell-sponsored Briefings Direct discussions. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this along to your IT community and do come back next time.